Tau Ceti didn't scream when humanity violated it. It whispered. At 0421 UTC, during a scheduled core stabilization drill beneath the fourth stratum of Site Tau 7, a subterranean bore probe struck something it shouldn't have. Not mineral, not fluid, structured, layered with crystalline baffles and non-terrestrial heat sinks. The rig's seismic telemetry spiked into negative impedance, and for 2 full seconds, Earth's systems logged a blank return, like the world blinked and forgot it existed. 212 meters down, the drill pierced a Ja'ar deep surveillance spine, a relic of the Ligran Accord, one of the Dominion's eyes, still active, though silent for centuries. Above the surface, the outpost's lead technician, Commander von Lerich, stared at the data and muttered a word that didn't make it into the official log. Ghosts. 10 minutes later, he triggered blackout protocols. The report didn't reach Earth's Strategic Council until 93 minutes later. By then, it was already too late. At 0620 UTC, the first Dominion signature broke across Neptune's orbital shell. Ja'ar carrier-class vessels, 3 of them, moving in perfect waveform, ignoring hails, bypassing standard approach vectors. Their gravity wells warped the Jovian fringe, rippling Jupiter's magnetosphere like a flag in solar wind. Each ship was a doctrine symbol. Clean, absolute, unchallenged. A signal reached Earth Command exactly 9 seconds before their formation stabilized. It wasn't an attack, not yet. It was a broadcast, flat channel, unencrypted, monochromatic Dominion dialect. Withdraw. Your presence has breached a protected spine. This constitutes non-member interference under Accord Enforcement Subclause Dakar 3. Fire and be erased. The room fell into algorithmic silence. Inside Earth's Strategic Council's subterranean command tier, Burrow 9, 25 men sat under flickering tenue. Tactical overlays. Some stared at bioscan trees. Others read over the Ja'ar signal transcript like it was a funeral announcement they hadn't expected to receive. Fleet Marshal Adrix Val looked up from the alert stream and asked, "Are they targeting?" "No," answered Ops Lead Drenkor. "They're waiting." "Why?" "Because they still think they're feared." In the corner of the war room, silent until now, sat Commander Arik Trenor. Grey uniformed, face unreadable, eyes bloodshot from 3 years of 6-hour sleep rotations and 12-hour simulations. He wasn't surprised by the alert. He didn't flinch, because this was the one scenario he'd spent his entire post-Sato life planning for. 10 years earlier, Sato Relay Station, a listening node in decaying orbit around the Oort-scattered moon, Kravas 3. It had gone dark during a routine drift cycle. Earth had never been meant to investigate it. But a shadow directive under Project Hallow let Trenor's team intercept the station before Dominion reclamation did. Inside, they found Dominion command stack shards, inert but partially readable. They weren't weapons, they were logic architectures, synchronization maps, fleet coordination heuristics, AI back-channel modulation keys. It was their brain, and it had gaps. The retrieval logs were classified under a Tier 9 obfuscation shell. What wasn't written but silently acknowledged was this: the Ja'ar fleet architecture depended on perfect internal consensus. No consensus, no coordination. No coordination, no war. And so began the first draft of Operation Disjoint. Back in Burrow 9, Earth's leadership debated diplomacy. The Accord would frown on escalation. Public exposure meant sanctions, possibly even system-level trade suspensions. But Trenor wasn't listening to the arguments. He was watching his private slate. It displayed 17 nodes across the Sol system, each marked as Astro Observation Relay to civilian eyes. To the Dominion, they looked like passive Earth telescopes, instruments of wonder, not war. But to Trenor, each one was a Q-splice vector housing a non-lethal Aegis sync pulse engine, optimized not to destroy ships, but to sever their ability to think together. He tapped the slate once. The screen shifted. All 17 relays showed green, synchronized, waiting. Across the room, someone asked, "Should we acknowledge the Dominion envoy?" Another voice answered, "They said, 'Fire on us, and you die.'" Trenor looked up from his screen. No emotion, no movement, except the faint tightening at his jaw. His voice was calm when it finally came. Already did. In orbit above Luna, nestled between outdated communication buoys and civilian weather monitors, relay node 04 came online at 0740 UTC. To the untrained eye, it was just another aging telescope, an observatory tasked with capturing solar radiation anomalies and stellar drift data. What no one outside Earth's strategic warfare knew was that its core had been hollowed and rebuilt 4 years earlier. The radiation dishes were real, but the heart of the system, the part sealed behind a trinary-locked isolation grid, was Aegis sync technology. Quantum pulse modulation plates, copper-sleeved oscillators, and a black drive coil powered by hydrogen cluster decay. All of it designed for one task, to interrupt a thought before it became a command. The Aegis sync was never meant to destroy. That was its strength. A weapon that left no crater was harder to blame. Instead, it targeted structure, not physical, but cognitive. The Ja'ar Dominion operated on fleet-scale AI stacks, distributed co-decision lattices that required uninterrupted consensus between vessels. The moment synchronization failed, the entire system folded inward. Command loops locked, response time fragmented, initiative scattered. Their fleets were apex tools until someone severed the mental scaffolding holding them together. And Earth had spent a decade building a scalpel sharp enough to do exactly that. The first prototype had failed, catastrophically. Test Site Severin, orbiting the shadow of Mars, had suffered a full comms blackout for 6 days after the initial pulse. Every drone lost guidance. The site's internal AI began replicating error correction protocols that didn't exist. It took 9 months to understand the feedback loop, another year to isolate the signature field effect that initiated the desync. The breakthrough came when Trenor's lead technologist, Kren Vask, now buried under 24 NDAs and a false retirement, suggested a repolarized spike array that didn't match the Dominion's primary commie harmonics, but their maintenance subband. That changed everything. The subband was never monitored during wartime operations. It was too low in volume, too stable to worry about. But the Aegis sync didn't need power, it needed coincidence. And once they figured out how to mimic the exact wrongness that caused Dominion stacks to reinitialize, the pulses could be calibrated without triggering alarms. Earth wouldn't have to fight the Ja'ar. It would simply confuse them to death. Now, 17 of those arrays were live. Commander Trenor stood inside Control Cell Echelon, 70 meters beneath Burrow 9's outer defense tier. Around him, 6 tactical operatives monitored relay sync pulse alignment. The room wasn't buzzing, it wasn't loud, it was quiet, like everyone was holding breath in perfect rhythm. One of the junior techs called out that Relay 12 had finished phase alignment. Mars sector was green, that made 11 active. Then 15, then 17. Trenor didn't blink. His eyes traced the overlay. Earth's system-wide net pulsing like a soft heartbeat. Each Q-splice array tuned down to silence, frequency matched to the Dominion's invisible thresholds. The Ja'ar couldn't see them, couldn't hear them, and more importantly, couldn't stop them once they fired. On the edge of Jupiter's orbit, the Ja'ar carriers maintained formation. They hovered with imperial precision, 3 crescent-shaped leviathans laced with shimmering data arches and unblinking hull sensors. They hadn't moved since issuing their threat. That was their doctrine, supreme patience anchored in superiority. They didn't bluff, they didn't repeat themselves. History had shown they never needed to. But this time, they'd made one mistake. They thought Earth was playing the old game. Trenor gave no verbal order, no gesture. He simply pressed his palm to the embedded slate on his command console. His biometric ID cleared. The system executed the code he'd written himself, line by line. The command was not fire, it was cut. At 0752 UTC, every Aegis sync pulsed simultaneously. No light, no sound, not even heat, just a shift. a microscopic rearrangement of space-time modulation targeted through calibration matrices so narrow they made nanometer optics look imprecise. Across the system, the 17 nodes, disguised as research observatories, resource mappers, deep-field spectrographs, released the first and only wave of Operation Disjoint. At the same moment, aboard the Dominion flagship Velha Prime, Command Stack Delta failed to acquire consensus with Subcore Path 2. The AI governing long-range tactical assessment lost its predictive loop. Subunits reported asynchronous pattern drift. By Ja'ar doctrine, the stack began a hard rollback to last known good config. On Carrier 2, Jarak 7, the AI initiated an emergency desync avoidance routines, but couldn't handshake with Velha Prime's beacon. It flagged a recursive fault and downgraded targeting systems to analog override. That triggered a cascade flag on all connected vessels. Carrier 3, Thalcon Dar, responded by entering autonomous posture, designed only for civil enforcement missions, not wartime readiness. The entire fleet, one of the most feared formations in known space, fractured in less than 90 seconds. Back in Earth's control chamber, Trenor's screen updated with new telemetry. No Dominion weapon locks, no scan bursts. Movement patterns jittered. Orientation arcs looped in hesitation curves, turns that indicated systems struggling to resolve who they were facing, or even why. Confirmation? Someone asked. Command desync verified, came the reply. Trenor didn't speak. He didn't need to, because it was working. The Ja'ar fleet had come expecting provocation. What they received was silence. Silence that severed thought, fractured vision, and turned coordination into white noise. They had deployed weapons to enforce deterrence, but deterrence only functions in the presence of clarity. Earth had taken that away. Trenor stepped away from his console and walked to the far end of the chamber. Beyond reinforced glass, a three-dimensional display rotated slowly, showing Sol's system in real time. Jupiter glowed like an angry eye. The Ja'ar formation drifted, no longer uniform. Shimmer trails bled away from one of the carriers, indicating failed burn synchronization. Their formation had broken, not by force, but by design. This wasn't victory, not yet, but it was the beginning of it. And it had taken less than 2 minutes. On board the Ja'ar Dominion flagship Velha Prime, Commander Arvex Halos stood before the central coordination pillar, 3 luminous rings rotating silently around his scaled torso, reflecting in the folds of his command crest. He didn't flinch as the second tactical alert blinked into view. He didn't need to. This was familiar protocol, deviation in fleet consensus, minor synchronization delay, likely from stellar interference. Earth's systems were dense with magnetic clutter and outdated satellite shells. Beneath him, the bridge crew began realigning formation vectors, smooth, predictable, professional. Until the third alert came, then the fourth, each one faster, each one with subtly different cause codes. One flagged subsystem logic mismatch. Another warned of behavioral recursion loopbacks. A third simply read, target resolution lost. Haller's inner mandibles tightened, his confidence still intact, but tinged now with something he hadn't felt in 100 cycles, curiosity laced with unease. Raise signal resolution to primary war tier, he ordered. Full beam lock across all vessels, defensive posturing only. Carrier Jarak 7 acknowledged, but Thalcon Dar lagged by several seconds, an impossibility under Dominion protocol. Their stacks should have been synchronized to the millisecond. The bridge's ambient glow dimmed, system cycles grinding as if something beneath the architecture was off. Not broken, not jammed, just misaligned as if 2 identical songs had started from the same note but drifted a hair apart, producing friction that couldn't be seen, only felt. From Earth's orbital command, Trenor watched the Ja'ar vessels adjust orientation in fractal microbursts. Each ship drifted 2 degrees off-center, corrected, drifted again. Small deviations. But when it came to Dominion battle doctrine, small was enough to signal collapse. Earth hadn't delete. At their vision, it had introduced contradiction. Aegis sinks had ruptured cohesion, not by disrupting data, but by feeding just enough static to corrupt certainty. The Ja'ar responded with procedure. Standard Dominion escalation drills, flash their kinetic arrays, project a zero-range burn threat, signal mass displacement across Earth's upper orbit. Yet no shots were fired, because they couldn't confirm where Earth's defense grid began, or even if it had activated. To the Ja'ar, Earth looked empty. But to the Dominion command stack, it looked crowded. Carrier sensors began pulling anomalies from multiple radial zones. Thermal echoes drifted from Antarctica's ice cap, registered as 27 discrete vehicle groupings. Mars showed 25 unidentified contact shadows near Valle's outpost, yet Earth had abandoned that site a decade ago. Orbit showed duplicate cruiser signatures over the Pacific corridor, then over Siberia, then again. Identical identifiers, different vectors. Earth's disruption theater had begun. Trenner had deployed layers of false telemetry across low-orbit beacons and ground-fed loopbacks weeks in advance. Ghost fleets. Holographic targeting silhouettes that never existed in physical space. The Ja'ar saw a battlefield shaped by contradiction. A swarm with no center. Movement without origin. Inside Velha Prime, command AIs began showing signs of subroutines bleeding into deprecated protocol trees. Arvex watched as targeting maps flickered between civilian profiles and classified military anomalies. Filters flipped, safe zones overlapped threat vectors. One screen flagged a humanitarian evacuation corridor over the southern Atlantic. Another labeled the same zone as a heat-shielded kinetic launch arc. His own ship could no longer guarantee where Earth's defenses were, or even if they were active. He snapped his lower limbs to the floor plate and growled, "Begin sweep fire on all overlapping zones. Restore map clarity." The crew hesitated. One of them, a younger node lieutenant whose face bore no age crest, spoke without looking up. "Commander, resolution variance exceeds sanctioned margin. Protocol Tier A3 limits action against ambiguous targets." "Override it." "Override requires situational proof of aggression." Arvex's claws twitched. That moment of pause, of doubt, was the first real fracture. He didn't see Earth's fleet. That was what rattled him. He saw static. Patterns meant to provoke decision without providing justification. And in the Dominion, unjustified action was weakness. The code was clear. Act only in consensus. Fire only with proof. The system had worked for 1,000 years. But Earth wasn't attacking them. Earth wasn't visible. On Earth's side, Trenner stood before his officers in Burrow 9's primary sim room. The Dominion's orientation chart spun lazily in projection. Red spheres for the Ja'ar fleet, transparent overlays for all 19 false fleets Trenner's team had mapped into their perception net. Each movement matched the Dominion's drift, but none of it was real. Not a single human ship had moved. Carrier 3's targeting array just locked onto a relief station, one operator said, his voice flat. "Confirm type," Trenner replied. "Medical staging vessel, painted in neutral protocol colors. No weapons, no propulsion. Do we stop it?" Trenner's gaze didn't shift. "No. Let the doctrine make the mistake." Seconds later, on the edge of orbit, Thulkandar released a kinetic dart, low yield, meant for surgical elimination. The projectile struck the relief vessel amidships, breaking its spine and splitting the hull into 3 flaming arcs. The fireball bloomed. Inside Velha Prime, the glow painted every viewing lens in blood-orange light. The screen labeled the destroyed craft, relief transport, Accord registered, Tier 5, an error, a public one. Arvex Haller. As command stack froze, half his bridge officers turned to stare. The node lieutenant spoke again, more quietly this time. "Protocol failure. You voided Article 72. In JAR hierarchy, voiding Article 72 didn't just imply mistaken targeting, it was classified as a fracture of command integrity, grounds for immediate removal. 3 security officers crossed the bridge before Arvex could speak. He stepped back, silent, not resisting. He knew the cost. The Dominion didn't forgive clarity born of confusion. As he was escorted away, his eyes passed the wall of flickering threat overlays, ghosts on ghosted ground, none of them real. Back in Burrow 9, Trenor exhaled slowly. They've begun doubting their own orders. His second-in-command, a former fleet analyst named Darren Roke, shook his head. You think they still believe we fired first? Trenor didn't answer. He didn't need to, because belief had already been replaced by something worse, uncertainty. And uncertainty was all the weapon Earth needed. There was no shockwave, no transmission spike, no audible marker when Earth pulled the pin on Operation Null Crown. It began with a line of code transmitted through a pathway no one had used in centuries, a diplomatic relay so old it predated most modern war protocols, kept alive solely because the Dominion's Central Treaty Charter had never formally deprecated it. It wasn't fast, it wasn't flashy, but it was legal, and that made it lethal. Commander Arik Trenor stood alone in the comm chamber, shielded by layers of electromagnetic insulation and old-world steel. This was the room where Earth stored its oldest diplomatic mechanisms, the fallback systems designed for scenarios where traditional channels had failed or become compromised. Null Crown's key had been written into Earth's emergency protocol 6 years prior, tucked away inside a shell of bureaucratic misdirection. Its purpose wasn't tactical advantage, it was legal preemption. It was Earth's ability to stand before the Galactic Tribunal and say, with full verification, we acted in accordance. The message transmitted was not an appeal nor a plea for delay. It was a declaration, quiet, surgical, delivered through the formal syntax of Accord High Code, marked with an official timestamp, biometric confirmation, and Earth's seal of observational sovereignty. At its core was one clause, Article 49C, a rarely invoked rule permitting defensive non-kinetic prevention measures by non-member states in the face of unacknowledged surveillance infrastructure buried inside Accord-controlled systems. Earth hadn't fired a weapon. Earth had turned off a mirror and waited for someone to punch their own reflection. The message also included appendices, dozens of them, transparent code audits of every Aegis Sync relay activation, time-stamped logs showing the Dominion's preemptive signal lock on what were, by Earth registration, classified civilian nodes. Encrypted overlays matching the Ja'ar kinetic strike with the exact location of a registered Accord relief vessel, along with pre-strike images confirming its non-military payload. Line by line, packet by packet, Earth didn't argue its innocence. It proved the Dominion had initiated aggression against illusions born of their own confusion. In Ja'ar command chambers aboard Velhar Prime, the message arrived like rot beneath gold plating. The bridge, now under interim leadership, processed the data without fanfare. They couldn't deny the source. It was encoded through Dominion treaty-authorized bands. They couldn't block the content. Accord relay protocols mandated full dissemination across all member systems, and they couldn't claim forgery. Earth's data signatures had been registered under the UAN Treaty Compact 60 years ago, with validation chains stored inside the Accord's neutral registry vaults. The Dominion officers read in silence. There were no insults, no human bravado, no threats or mocking, just structured documentation showing every action Earth had taken, and more importantly, every action it hadn't. The absence was damning. No human warships had moved into attack posture. No planetary shields had been raised in provocation. The Aegis pulses hadn't crossed Dominion battlefields. They had simply interrupted a surveillance structure that no one had admitted still existed. That omission, buried inside the Dominion's own doctrine, had handed Earth the legal fulcrum it needed. In Burrow 9, Trenor watched the packet confirmation come through. The Dominion had received the message. The Accord's relay chain had validated the data. It was now officially entered into the galactic legal web. Earth's case wasn't just known, it was precedent. His tactical staff remained silent. They understood what this meant, even before Trenor spoke. Firepower was irrelevant now. Any move the Ja'ar made beyond this point would violate their own code. Every ship in their formation now floated inside a paradox. Armed, alert, and legally disarmed by a packet of archived protocols they hadn't thought anyone remembered. Across Accord networks, the story began spreading. Independent relays picked up the message's secondary headers. Non-member systems started mirroring the documentation in public archives. Academic war colleges began debating the legitimacy of Earth's non-kinetic obfuscation mesh. Dozens of smaller species, many of whom had long remained silent under Dominion pressure, suddenly had a reason to study their own legacy code frameworks, looking for embedded vulnerabilities, tracing old Dominion logic trees that might be exploited the same way. Earth hadn't launched a war. It had opened a courtroom. Inside Thalkandar, the interim commander reviewed the legal dossier with mounting discomfort. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't trained in diplomatic code law, but even he could see the trap. Earth had presented no target, and that made retaliation not just risky, but procedurally indefensible. Every remaining Dominion ship was now locked in an impossible posture. The only way forward was violence. But violence without proof was classified as escalatory aggression, a clear violation of the Accord's deterrence clause. The Ja'ar had been unmade, not with weapons, but with syntax. In Burrow 9, Trenor leaned against the observation platform, watching the Ja'ar fleet continue to drift. No aggression, no withdrawal, just motionless stasis, frozen in the moment before a fall. His second-in-command, Darren Roke, approached quietly. "They'll have to respond." "They already did," Trenor replied. The phrase didn't mean attack, it meant collapse. The Dominion had responded by revealing they could be tricked, that their 1,000-year record of control was built on assumption, not immunity. And now that Earth had introduced ambiguity into the equation, their authority was no longer absolute. It was conditional. That shift couldn't be undone. By the end of the hour, Accord relay nodes flagged Earth's submission as a challenge requiring tribunal review. The Dominion filed a counterclaim, arguing Earth's use of perception disruption was a form of undeclared psychological warfare. But they couldn't define it in kinetic terms. They couldn't point to a burned city or a downed cruiser. There was nothing they could hold up as proof of provocation. And that was the point. Null Crown had done exactly what it was designed to do. Not disable a fleet, but disable the Dominion's ability to define what war looked like. Because once the rules are in question, the one who holds the definition holds the battlefield. The Accord Tribunal Hall was not built for war. It had no banners, no seats of conquest, no armed esteem. Courts flanking the chamber. It was designed for ceremony, polished obsidian floors, a domed ceiling lit with the soft blue of archive light, and 9 podiums arranged in a perfect ring around the central pillar. Each represented a voting species, senior signatories of the Accord who claimed neutrality even as their histories dripped with buried wars and quiet dominations. The Ja'ar had never been challenged here, until now. The emergency session opened with gravity the room hadn't felt in centuries. The Ja'ar delegation entered first, robed in absolute black, the color of finality. They moved as one, scales polished to mirror sheen, crest sigils gleaming like battle banners in disguise. Their lead, Speaker Arul Tun, took his station without looking at the other delegates. That, in itself, was a statement. Across from them, Earth's podium remained empty. No delegates had arrived, no envoys beamed in, just a sealed dossier resting inside the central pillar, digitally time-stamped and verified by 3 separate Concord-level encryption auditors. The silence was not passive. It was deliberate. Earth hadn't come to argue. They'd come to witness their opponent try to explain why they lost control. The tribunal moderator, a sallow-framed Routhian with calcified tendrils curling down his temples, began the proceedings with a single question. Does the Ja'ar Dominion wish to submit a formal charge? Speaker Arul Tun did not hesitate. Yes. The human species committed a Class Theta information assault under the guise of defensive activation. Their operation constituted a digital-first strike. The chamber remained still. Behind the Ja'ar, a transparent projection bloomed, showing the drift patterns of the Dominion fleet, the breakdown of coordination, the strike on the Accord-marked medical vessel, all documented, all irrefutable. But when the speaker attempted to define the Causality. When he moved to categorize the Aegis pulse as a weapon in legal code, his tone faltered. The definition didn't exist. The Accord's war law was built on actions: propulsion, energy displacement, projectile type, structural damage. Nowhere in the charter did it mention consensus corruption or synchronization breakdown. Earth had not attacked a body. They had short-circuited a mind. And for the first time in Ja'ar history, that distinction mattered. The Routhian moderator looked down at the open files before him. The code audit Earth submitted is complete. All pulses registered below kinetic threshold. No energy displacement, no hull impact, no offensive trajectory. Araltun tried to pivot. Intent is sufficient. Their pulses were designed to disarm. The moderator's tendrils shifted slightly, and did they succeed? A pause. Yes. That was the moment everything shifted. Admission, not of war, but of failure, and worse, vulnerability. In Ja'ar culture, that word had no political equivalent. Their doctrine had always depended on superiority. Now they were admitting their systems had been compromised without a single round being fired. From the other podiums, the silence cracked. The Lyranth delegate, slow-speaking, centuries old, a creature that measured time in planetary decay cycles, spoke next. If no ordinance was launched, if no declaration preceded the action, then we cannot legally define it as aggression. Araltun bristled. We were deceived, targeted through perceptual warfare. Earth baited us into breaking our own doctrine. The Harlaxi ambassador, thin, webbed and blind, tilted his head. And Earth told you to fire? No. Did they alter your targeting AI? No. Did they falsify identification of your own systems? No. Then why did you strike? Another pause, this one longer and heavier. Because we believed they were threats. It was the worst possible answer. Because it wasn't law that bound the Accord, it was the performance of stability. Every species in that room had committed atrocities in the name of peace, but the illusion held because they could all pretend the rules worked. The Ja'ar had just shown they could be provoked by shadows, and in doing so they'd proven the law wasn't strong enough to contain their power. The vote was not shouted. It didn't need to be. The chamber processed it through private tactile nodules. A signal passed silently through the floor, transmitted via subdermal contact. One by one, the votes tallied. 5 for suspension, 4 against. Majority reached. The announcement arrived not as sound, but as a shift in the lighting. The central pillar turned a muted violet, the color of provisional censure. The Ja'ar Dominion's enforcement privileges were suspended, pending investigation. Their fleets could no longer engage. Their jurisdictional claims were frozen, and Earth had won, without ever standing on the floor. Outside the tribunal chamber, the ripple was immediate. In systems like Haven Reach, where Ja'ar observation nodes had operated without formal treaties for generations, local governments began issuing software audits of their own infrastructure. In the outer colonies of the Sealer Accord, engineers discovered dormant compliance routines buried inside translation servers, fragments written in Earth-style syntax. They'd been introduced under the guise of open science exchange decades earlier. Now, those same fragments served as triggers that responded to Earth's pulse harmonics. Earth had planted seeds long ago. All they needed was the right moment to bloom. The revelation hit harder than any weapon, because it meant Earth had never intended to win one war. They'd engineered a pressure shift across the galactic system, a psychological detonation that turned every quiet collaborator into a question mark. How many more dormant routines were out there? How many ships? How many networks? How many sensor grids were quietly primed to break the moment Earth whispered the right frequency? Inside Burrow 9, Trenner received the vote confirmation without ceremony. The room did not erupt. No one clapped. The tactical team simply acknowledged the feed with a nod. Then they shut it off. They had no interest in gloating, because the job wasn't celebration, it was containment. Trenner stared at the system-wide threat map. Every red marker now turned grey. The Ja'ar were blind and legally bound, not by chains, by definitions. Rewritten, reinterpreted, weaponized. He spoke only once that night, before leaving the control floor. Never fight to be right, fight to make them wrong. And now, across 9 sectors, that truth had teeth. Because the moment the Ja'ar lost the vote, they lost the narrative. And the empire that couldn't be questioned now stood silent, stripped of certainty, in a courtroom it used to command. The silence that followed was not the uneasy kind that fills the void after tension. It was final, stable, the kind that settles across a battlefield untouched by fire, where victory doesn't echo through wreckage, but through the absence of it. The Ja'ar dominion, once feared for its surgical retaliations and absolute deterrence doctrine, found itself bound by the very codes it had used for centuries to keep order. Without proof of kinetic aggression, without a crater, a dead crew, or even a displaced defense grid, they could not respond. Not legally, not morally, not without unraveling their own authority. Across their sectors, fleet readiness dropped into administrative lockdown. Their command structures remained technically operational, but untrusted. Internal audits, triggered by the Accord vote, uncovered fragmented logic webs, pathways Earth had never touched, but whose flaws Earth had exposed for all to see. The Dominion's grand architecture wasn't shattered, it was doubted. And for an empire that had thrived on perceived infallibility, doubt whizzes as a terminal wound. Earth's fleets never left orbit. Civilian populations never evacuated. The emergency alert systems were never activated. From the ground, the entire incident was invisible, just a brief blackout in long-range navigation updates, a short-lived rumor about increased satellite drift near Jupiter, and then nothing. No blood. No loss. Just a planet that continued rotating beneath a sky that had once held the potential for war and now held only unanswered questions. Inside Burrow 9, the control stations were powered down one by one. Tactical relays closed their loops. Q-splice nodes returned to passive astronomical survey mode. The Aegis sinks were set to dormant standby, not disarmed, but unreadable. There was no debrief ceremony, no broadcast of triumph, just a series of quiet shutdowns and silent handoffs, because the war they'd fought didn't offer catharsis. It didn't end in bodies or banners, it ended in procedural exhaustion. Commander Arik Trenner submitted his resignation 3 days later. The memo was brief. It contained no praise, no self-justification. He listed his reason as sustained cognitive load impact on command teams, citing symptoms ranging from strategic dissociation to ethical displacement syndrome, terms rarely spoken outside of black operations. He concluded that no human mind should endure the paradox of dismantling an enemy without witnessing cause and effect. Victory, he implied, came at a price when the battlefield lived entirely in simulation and inference. His departure wasn't resisted. It didn't need to be. The war had already ended, and the quiet exit fit the tone of the entire engagement. But before he left, Trenner passed a single document to Earth Strategic Command. It was a technical deconstruction, a dissection of the operation in clean, sober language, part tactical analysis, part philosophical treatise. It tracked each stage of disjoint and null crown, each escalation trigger, each legal position Earth had prepared to occupy before it was ever challenged. The final line of the memo was not a warning or a boast, it was an assertion. In this war, the weapons were not ships, they were definitions, and we made sure ours were written in advance. Within weeks, that line became doctrine. It was taught across strategic academies, translated into 42 languages, analyzed by defense analysts and cultural theorists alike. It was dissected not for what it said, but for what it revealed. That Earth had not just won a conflict, it had redefined what conflict was allowed to mean. No shots, no screams, no sirens, just intent rendered into law and law shaped into action. The Accord renamed the incident in their records. No one called it the Ja'ar sanction or the Jovian standoff. It became something colder, something cleaner. The Echo event. a term that described what the Dominion had fired at. Echoes, reflections of threats that weren't there, and Earth's role, not as the attacker, but as the architect of absence. The initiator of a silence so precise it left the enemy convinced they had been assaulted, only to find themselves staring at unbroken glass, their weapons still warm, their orders lost in the static of a war they couldn't prove had happened. In the years that followed, Earth's standing in the accord shifted. Not upward in hierarchy, humans still lacked interstellar reach, still lagged in deep field colonization and high-yield energy synthesis. But their influence crystallized in one place: precedent. Accord legislation now referenced their engagement. Subclauses were amended to account for non-kinetic obfuscation, synchronizer, mission warfare, and preemptive legality manipulation. Quietly, Earth became the species everyone feared to outmaneuver. Because they hadn't broken the system, they had mastered it. And as Dominion fleets restructured under careful review, as old allies reconsidered their blind obedience to power, as younger species reread their treaties with fresh eyes, one truth lingered at the edges of every negotiation, every alliance, every doctrine update. Humanity didn't win with force, they won with framing, and the galaxy had no defense for that. What do you think? Was Earth's move true defense or a new kind of weapon? Should the galaxy fear humanity's strategy more than its strength? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's hear how you would have handled the Ja'ar standoff. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more thrilling HFY stories.